So as David Kasoy indicated, it's a real pleasure and actually an honor to have Kathy Cameron speaking to us today. The honor is because she allowed us to help support her research. She received a research grant from the Retired Faculty Association. We have all sorts of money, as you can imagine, and we've showered her with dollars to get her to Chaco Canyon for this research. And so we feel particularly honored that we could help her in her research projects. Kathy has had a very varied and I'd say intellectually adventurous career, doing all sorts of good things in archaeology. In the early part of this century, 2002 or 2005, she ran the field school at Bluff and functioned as a dirt archaeologist, excavating the Bluff Great House. And since then, she has engaged in a number of projects that have a very interesting, a modern and current sense to them. Her most recent publications involve things like Captives, the Invisible Migrant, Captives, How Stolen People Have Changed the World, Not Just Disease, Ideology of Risk and Indigenous Population Decline in North America. And a little bit earlier in 2016, she received the Gordon Wiley Prize of the American Anthropological Association for the best paper published in their journal for 3 years before that. So it is indeed a great pleasure and honor to have you speak today about another adventurous topic, I dare say, exploring authority in Chaco through ground stones. I give you Professor Cameron.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim, for that very, very nice introduction. So I guess I'll just start by acknowledging that we've got Veterans Day coming up tomorrow. So there's pace and sheets. Hi. So you're not a veteran. No, that wasn't directed at you, but anyway. And thanks to all of you for supporting the research that I did out in Chaco. So I'll be talking a bit about that today, but thanks so much. That was really wonderful. And also thanks from my two colleagues who I'll talk about. So, what I'm doing today is telling you about our broader project and then about the specific part of it that you guys funded. So with two colleagues, I'm doing a study of groundstone artifacts in Chaco Canyon. And has anybody been to Chaco? How many people have? Oh, lots. Okay, well, I may tell you more than you need to know, but for those of you that haven't, I'll give a thumbnail. It's a World Heritage Site, and it's a World Heritage Site for a very good reason. For about 1,000 years ago, it was filled with remarkable great houses like this one. This is Pueblo Bonito, and if any of you have been to Chaco, you've almost certainly been to this site. It was also the capital of a large region, so a region that took up much of the northern Southwest. And in that bigger region, there were great houses like this, but they were smaller. They weren't quite this grand. It is also the ancestral place of modern Pueblo people, the people that live at places like Hopi and Zuni, the Pueblos along the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and so on. So I'm going to tell you more about Chaco in a minute, but let me also start by just giving a thumbnail of the project we're doing. So let's see. This is now not working. Okay, well, never mind. I'll just do it this way. Nope, it's not working at all. So who do I ask for help? we have? I think when he turned on this computer, it might have prevented me from. You try and start it again. Okay, let's see if that, yeah, I've got it. I don't, yeah.
I'm just having him look.
Having you look in. Okay, so I said I'm studying groundstone artifacts in Chaco. These are the kinds of things I'm looking at. I'm going to be primarily talking today about metates. And this is a mono and metate right here in this image. So I'm primarily going to be talking about things like that. Monos and metates, I'm sure any of you that know the Southwest at all know that those are used to grind corn, and they were, corn was the primary food for Pueblo people. So these were very important objects. But groundstone includes any object that is manufactured by pecking, grinding, and polishing. So any object that's made with those techniques. So up here, there are ornaments made with pecking, grinding, and polishing. There's a, if this works, yes, it does. Okay, so there's a bead that's made with those techniques. A hoe, this could be a ceremonial hoe, they're called chamajillas. Pallets, you can see red ochre on these pallets, so they're grinding pigments, but the objects are made with pecking, grinding, and polishing. Here's a stone axe made with those techniques. And this is a stone disc. And if we have time, I want to talk a little bit about stone discs as well as metates, because they're really, really interesting. Okay, so I'll begin by telling you a little bit about my colleagues and myself and the nature of our project. And then I'll give a quick overview of Chaco Canyon and what was going on there in ancient times. And then I'll talk about this groundstone analysis that we've been doing, at least what we've been doing to date. Okay, so here's an image of, once again, Pueblo Bonito behind here. And there I am on the mesa above Pueblo Bonito. Maybe some of you have been up there too. This is my husband, Steve Lexon, and where is he? Right there in the middle, right there. So he and I both worked on a project in Chaco Canyon back many decades ago. He is also a CU professor. He worked at the CU Museum. This is another CU professor. I'm going to try and emphasize all the CU connections here today because there are lots of them. This is Gerardo Gutierrez, who's not retired, still working actively in the anthropology department, and his wife, Mary Pye. Gerardo did a remarkable study of a Chacoan site that I'll mention in a little bit using LiDAR. And I wish I had time to talk about his project too, because it's very interesting. So I'm a Southwestern archaeologist. I've spent most of my time working on issues of Chacoan archaeology. In the late 70s and 80s, like I said, I worked on the Chaco Research Project. This was a National Park Service funded project. National Park Service doesn't fund many research projects, but we did excavation on a great house and then several small sites. And we had winter labs at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, where we analyzed artifacts and wrote reports on the excavations. So this was a really remarkable opportunity, to live in the canyon and to do this research on one of the most important archaeological places in the Southwest. So since then, I've done a lot of other kinds of work. Kim mentioned a few of those, but I still have a very strong interest in Chaco. So I'm working with two colleagues, Jenny Adams and Bill Gillespie, on these groundstone artifacts. So the three of us, and occasionally Steve too, are working on this project. Again, CU connection. Bill and Jenny both got their degrees here. Jenny got her undergraduate degree here, and Bill got his undergraduate and his master's degree here at CU. They both Jenny and Bill also were on a project at Mesa Verde. They worked on a field school that was directed by, I don't know if any of you remember, Dr. David Bretternetz. He's been retired. Well, actually, he died a few years ago, but Dr. David Brennanitz was a CU professor. Also, Jack Smith worked on the Mesa Verde project, so all these CU connections. So Jenny is an internationally known expert on groundstone and has recently retired from a position at Desert Archaeology, which is an environmental and historic preservation company in Tucson. She studied groundstone for many years, primarily in the Southwest, but she gets invitations to, Paris, to the Near East, all over the world. She really is the person that is, most well known for this kind of research. She's written this book here. It is the premier book on groundstone analysis, and I don't know, maybe the only comprehensive book on this kind of artifact. So she is the senior researcher on this project. So much of what I'm telling you is a result of her analysis and interpretations. Bill Gillespie is retired from the Forest Service. He worked at the Coronado National Forest around Tucson, Arizona. He was also, again, on the Chaco Research Project with Steve and me back in the 70s and 80s. Jenny and I wanted him to participate in the project because he has lots of good insights on Chacoan archaeology. He's been, working in this region and still is interested in it, even though much of his work has been in the southern Southwest. He's also a wonderful photographer, so he's helping us gather a whole database on photographs on groundstone. Okay, so when I worked for the Chaco Research Project, this National Park Service project years ago, I analyzed one of the types of objects that we found at the sites we excavated. I analyzed monos. So these are the hand stones that go in metates, and you rub them back and forth and grind corn with them. And you can see these women grinding corn here. You're holding the metate is sort of on a slant, and you're rubbing back and forth and grinding the corn. So I did monos back in the day. I really enjoyed doing this kind of analysis. I love groundstone. It's not something many people love, but I did. So a couple of years ago, I suggested to Jenny that we spend more time looking at groundstone because I think there's just a lot more we can learn from these artifacts. But we're doing many types of groundstone, but focusing right now, we're focusing on these metates. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, but I think we'll branch out a bit as we go along. Okay, so that's a bit about what that's a little bit about the type of artifact I'm going to talk about. But before I get into the details, let me go to Chaco Canyon and tell you about Chaco Canyon and the bigger questions that are involved with that study. So many of you have been there, but for those of you that don't know, Chaco Canyon is located in northwestern New Mexico. Here it is right here. And this dotted line indicates the size of the Chacoan region, very big. So you can see all these dots here, dots and triangles and so on. Those are the great houses in Chaco Canyon, and these are the great houses outside Chaco Canyon. So it's the whole region is about the size of Ohio. It's a big, big region. The most important developments here happened between about 850 and 1150. And that's when these enormous great houses were built there. So here's an aerial view of the canyon. It's about 10 miles long, 2 miles wide. And what you'll notice is a lack of green. It's very arid out there, very dry. And those of you that have been there know it's a very dry place. It's not a very appealing place to live if you're a farmer. The ancient people who lived here 1,000 years ago were farmers. So one might wonder why farmers would want to settle in this place, in this very, very dry, arid place. Why would they go there at all? So it may not have vegetation, but Chaco does have these wonderful structures. Again, Pueblo Bonito. Pueblo Bonito is the biggest of the great houses, and this shows Pueblo Bonito after, of course, it became a ruin. The roofs fell off and it collapsed. This in the 1940s, this big rock fell off the cliff and crashed onto Bonito. But before that, it had something like 700 rooms. It was really big, one of the largest buildings in North America. People started to build there in about 8800, and it was used until the 1100s. So very, very long use of this building. Now, there are almost a dozen of these kinds of structures in Chaco Canyon. Bonito's the biggest, but there are half a dozen other really big structures there, like this one. This is Kettle, and really it's just right around the corner from Bonito. So probably if you went to Bonito, you also went to Kettle. So Bonito's right here. I mean, you can almost see it. You could almost hit it with a baseball. So you may be thinking, what were people doing here 1,000 years ago in this very barren place, building these huge structures? Who organized all that work? How could people even make a living there when it's so dry and barren? So these are the questions that archaeologists have been trying to answer for at least 120 years. We certainly know a lot more now than we did in the late 1800s when archaeologists first came to work there, but there are still lots and lots and lots of questions to answer and lots of debates about what was going on. Okay, and then another question you may be thinking about right now is, these are beautiful, elaborate buildings, but what's so special about them? Why is it special that they're here in Chaco Canyon? What's the big deal? Well, it is unusual because in the 800s and 900s, most people in the northern Southwest were living in something like this. This is called a unit pueblo. So it's got maybe 6 rooms. It's got one or two of these round rooms that are called kivas. Kivas are probably where people actually lived, and these rooms were more for storage and other activities. But that's what people lived in. So this was the home of an extended family. You might have a number of these gathered together into a village, but this was a very, very small, unelaborate dwelling for people. And so it was very unusual when people started building great houses. And just to give you the comparison, here's Pueblo Bonito, and here are 2 unit pueblos, right here and right here. They're right across the canyon from Pueblo Bonito. But these 2 images, this one and this one, are to the same scale. You could almost fit one of those unit pueblos into one of the rooms at Pueblo Bonito. That's the difference in scale. So Bonito is big, with big rooms, grand, 5 stories tall. These things are little 1-story, very, very simple dwellings. So that's what changed at 850 when people started building great houses. They quit living in these small sites. Or they didn't quit living in these small sites, I should say. I'll tell you more about that in a second. They didn't quit living in these small sites, but they also built these great houses. The question that people have been trying to answer for a long time about Chaco is, who did live in these great houses? It wasn't the common people. It wasn't people. There were still people living in little things like this surrounding a great house. But so who was living here and what were they up to? What were they doing? So that's the question that, sort of archaeologists have been trying to deal with for a long time. Now, just a little bit more about Chaco here. This is an interesting factoid about Chaco. Most of the great houses, and those are the squares here, are on the north side of the canyon. In fact, all of them are on the north side of the canyon. So you see, starting here, you see these squares all along the north side of the canyon. The small sites are on the south side of the canyon. So the small sites are the circles. And here's one here, here's a whole cluster of them there. And we're only showing you the ones that have been excavated. So here's some more here. This whole south side of the canyon was filled with unit pueblos, small little clusters of unit pueblos. And on the other side of the canyon were these great houses. So there's really a difference in who lived where. So that's quite interesting. And the key question again is, who lived in the great houses and how much power did they have? over the people living in the small sites, for example, or over the people living in the region. So those are the kinds of questions that people are trying to answer when they study Chaco. Now, there are so many great houses in Chaco Canyon that some people have called, some archaeologists have called it almost urban. So this slide shows the location of just 3 of these huge great houses, but there were others. There are lots of arguments about how many people actually lived in Chaco Canyon, and some archaeologists again see this density of buildings and think it was almost like a city. And
how far apart are those?
Pardon me?
How far apart are those?
Oh, no, I mean, you could walk from this one to this one in less 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 5 or 7. This one, you have to climb up a cliff to get it, but to get to it, 20 minutes maybe. So they're very close together. And if you want to know more about this, Steve Lexon right there in the middle is the Chaco scholar that has actually, I'm parroting a lot of what he says, so you can ask him about downtown Chaco and about what leaders are doing and that sort of thing. Okay, so now it was clear that that there was a lot of ritual, a lot of ceremonial activity going on in Chaco. There are structures called great kivas, and this is one of them. Anybody visit Casa Rinconada when they were out at Chaco? I bet you did, yeah. Because it's right across from Pueblo Bonito. It's a big round structure, would have been roofed back in the day when it was in use. This is where ceremonies took place. And these are not new when Chaco started. They had been used by Pueblo people since long before Chaco, and they continued to be used after Chaco was more or less over. But they were very distinctive during the Chaco era. So Casa Rinconada is a great kiva where there clearly were many ceremonies taking place. And there are also great kivas built right into Pueblo Bonito and some of the other great houses. So these are important ceremonial structures in Chaco. I better not go into the details about what went on there. We will be here all day. Now, one very interesting thing about Chaco is that when archaeologists started excavating there, they found all kinds of exotic goods that came from other parts of the Southwest and other parts of the world. It's pretty remarkable. Even the everyday pottery that people used came from the Chusca Mountains, which is about 70 miles from Chaco Canyon. Then there are objects that came from much further away. Turquoise, copper bells, scarlet macaws, obsidian. Now, scarlet macaws are tropical birds that come from Mesoamerica. Maybe 1,500 miles away would be where the range of scarlet macaws. This is cacao, which is used to make chocolate, and that also is a tropical plant. So you couldn't grow cacao in the Southwest, and so it was imported. It was imported from a long way away. I'll talk more again about cacao if we have time. Now, archaeologists say that Chaco was a magnet for exotic goods. And in a way it was, but almost all of them were found at Pueblo Bonito. Not all of them, but the vast majority of these exotic long distance goods were found at Pueblo Bonito. And so Pueblo Bonito was huge and special in many ways, including its groundstone. Now, probably the most remarkable thing that archaeologists have learned about Chaco was that it wasn't sitting out there all by itself. It was the center of a large regional system. And I showed you the regional map just a few minutes ago. Prehistoric roads radiate out from Chaco to great houses far away. So this is Pueblo Bonito, which is, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 miles southeast of Chaco. This is a prehistoric road that you can see if you go up to Pueblo Alto on the mesa above Bonito. But here's a modern 2-track road that you could drive. And here's a prehistoric road that goes right to Pueblo Bonito. The roads don't go right into the site, but they go right by them. So here you see the prehistoric road that's indicated now by a swale. And when it snows and it melts, you still can see a little bit of snow that sticks in the swale. So that's how you can identify them. Just so prehistoric roads are a characteristic of Chacoan sites. And just to add to our CU connections, this guy here walking along the road is Corey Bretternitz, son of a CU professor, David Bretternitz, and he also became an archaeologist himself. Okay, so the roads are pretty remarkable. Some were as much as 30 feet wide. They are engineered to go straight across the landscape. And when they came to an obstacle like a mesa, they might build stairs to go up to the top of the mesa. So here you're seeing some stairs to go up to the top. And here's a road, prehistoric road. This is Peñasco Blanco, a site at the far end of Chaco Canyon. And here's the prehistoric road going right by it. So these things are pretty remarkable. And they're remarkable in part because Chacoan people didn't have wheeled vehicles. They didn't have beasts of burden. They didn't have horses or mules or anything like that would require roads. So archaeologists believe the roads were used during ceremonies and also as memory devices. Excuse me. For example, they might connect an abandoned great house with a currently occupied great house. And some people even call them roads through time. So they're very interesting features. In fact, one of our grad students just got his degree in May and did a whole dissertation on Chacoan roads. And we've learned so much more from that dissertation. Really, really interesting. So we know of about 200 great houses spread out across this northern part of the Southwest. So I showed you a map before that was much bigger, but here's sort of focusing in on it. So here's the boundary again, and you're just seeing, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and you're seeing Chaco here, and then all these great houses around it. And these are prehistoric roads that have been well documented. There are others, there are lots of others. There are maybe 200 of these great houses. There is apparently an elaborate signaling system that people have documented, at least documented from Chimney Rock up here down into Chaco, so that people possibly could have communicated from the far distant edges of the region into Chaco Canyon. So that's also very interesting. So based on artifacts, roads, the signaling system, and so on, Chaco was the center of this large region. It was something that, that manifested in that way. So let me just sort of end this section on Chaco by telling you about a couple of these great houses that are outside the Chaco Canyon. So these are part of the region. So here's Chaco Canyon. I'm going to talk a little bit about Far View, which you may have seen if you've ever, I'm sure everybody here has been to Mesa Verde, I would guess, right?
Yes.
So if you went to Mesa Verde, you may have seen Far View. I'll jump down here to Canyon de Chelly. People may have seen the sites in Canyon de Chelly. I'll also talk about Chimney Rock here, and Kim Malville has done a ton of work there, which you may get to hear about. And then I'll talk about Bluff here. So those, I'll give you those 4 ones really quickly, just so that you know a little bit of what some of these outlying sites look like. Okay, so Far View, and also the Chacoan connection with CU is pretty remarkable. So I'll mention that too. So Far View was excavated by the Smithsonian in the early 1900s. Later in the 1950s, the sites around it were excavated by CU professor Robert Lister, who's been gone a long time. So that's Far View up at Mesa Verde. Here's White House. It's in Canyon de Chelly in northeastern Arizona. It was excavated by Earl Morris, who was a CU graduate. He graduated in 1915 with a degree in he got his undergraduate degree in 1914 and then his master's in 1915. And then he had a long-term association with the CU Museum. He was still associated with the CU Museum and working here in Boulder when he died in the 50s. Okay, so this is the most spectacular of the great houses. This is Chimney Rock, and you can see the great house right down here. These are the Chimney Rocks down near Pocosa Springs, Colorado, if any of you have been down that way. Its excavations are also associated with CU. In the 1970s, it was excavated by CU professor Frank Eddy. And oh no, I hope that isn't mine. Is it? No, somebody got it. Okay, so could have been. It was excavated by Frank Eddy in the 70s. And then in 2009, Steve Lexon right here did some more excavations with CU grad students. Perhaps most importantly, Kim Malville discovered here the lunar standstill. It happens at Chimney Rock every 18 years. This is a remarkable discovery. I'm not going to try and explain it because he'll be able to do that when we finish here. He can tell you all about it, but it's a very, very remarkable thing that he found there. Okay, and then finally, this is the Bluff Great House, and this is in here because most great houses, most outlying great houses look something like this. They're a big bump surrounded by small bumps. They're not terribly spectacular. The Bluff Great House is in up here in southeastern Utah. I excavated there, as Kim mentioned, in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I directed the CU Field School there. So it was great fun, but that's typically what a great house looks like. It doesn't look much like Chimney Rock. You can see some of our trenches here and some of the students and so on. But anyway, so that's just a little bit about what Chaco's all about and some of the big questions that archaeologists have been trying to answer. This is Fajada Butte. That's one of the major, landscape features up there. Really a beautiful big projection. Okay, so when Jenny Adams and I first conceived our project back in 2017, we began trying to develop a research design. As I mentioned, the big question about Chaco is how powerful were the people who lived in the great houses there? Were these just the homes of influential families without much influence or much power over other people, either inside or outside the canyon? Or were these religious leaders who had limited power, but were able to persuade people to build great houses and maybe to honor their gods or something like that? Or were there kings there? Kings and were these great houses actually palaces where very, very powerful people live? So these are long-standing questions, and really we're kind of moving in this direction. Again, this is something that Steve Lexon has spent a lot of his life talking about and thinking about. So we're more in this neighborhood now. You can ask Steve about it when we're done here. But these are very, very complex questions. I mean, these are the big questions that frame Chaco. But Jenny and I knew we weren't going to be able to answer them with groundstone. Groundstone is an interesting object, but it can't answer all questions. So we had to come up with much simpler questions. Now, as I've mentioned, Pueblo Bonito was different than the other great houses. It's bigger in terms of its architectural footprint and in terms of the number of rooms it had. In fact, it was the largest structure, I think I said this, in the United States until the 1880s. So it was really, really a big place. And it had an abundance of exotic goods, as I mentioned, copper bells, scarlet macaws, and so on, that made it different than other places. So there's no argument about the fact that Pueblo Bonito was special, but we believe that analysis of groundstone can help us understand how special it was, just how special Pueblo Bonito was. So Pueblo Bonito has been excavated over 135 years or so, something like that. It was first excavated by the American Museum of Natural History in the 1890s, again in the 1920s by the Smithsonian Institution, and then most recently in 2013, Patricia Crown of the University of New Mexico did some excavations there. They were limited. The park most parks don't let you do much at all in terms of excavation, but they let her do some limited work, and she learned a tremendous amount, which I'm hoping we have time to talk about. Okay, so here are our research questions. Monos and metates are basic domestic objects. They're something that, yeah, you use in your own kitchen. They were used, you know, by Pueblo people when they started doing agriculture, but they were even used before that to grind wild grass seeds before agriculture even started. So there's something like a Cuisinart or a grater that you use in your own kitchen these days. There's been quite a bit of analysis of monos and metates that were excavated from small sites in Chaco. I said, as I said, I did some myself years ago. But Pueblo Bonito and many of the other great houses that were excavated so long ago did not analyze these objects. At that time, archaeologists oftentimes didn't even bother to bring them back to the museum or back to the lab. They were big, bulky, and everybody thought, oh, they're just corn grinding implements. Why would we bother with those things? Just leave them there or toss them out or whatever. So no analysis back then. So our research question really boils down to whether the sort of quotidian, day-to-day activities at Pueblo Bonito, in terms of food preparation, really were the same as those that went on at sites in Chaco Canyon, at small sites in Chaco Canyon. So did Bonito and people at small sites use the same sort of grinding tools to do their food preparation? Or were the grinding stones, the metates and so on at Pueblo Bonito more elaborately made because these people were more important? And so you had special things for these specially high status people. And then we eventually learned that there was a third option. And we found out that there was actually a subset of metates at Pueblo Bonito that were significantly different from those at small sites. And they probably were not used for corn grinding, but for other types of perhaps ceremonial activities that perhaps symbolically referred to domestic activities. Now we have a lot more work to do. I mean, as I said, we've done a bunch of data collection. We've not only just barely gotten into the analysis of the data that we've collected. So we need to know what proportion of these metates at Bonito were these very special things. Where were they found? What kinds of proveniences were they found in? Exactly what were they used for? We may never know exactly what they were used for, but we might be able to get a better idea. So let me tell you a bit about how the project progressed before I talk about some of these directions that we've taken. The analysis of metates at small sites, at these unit pueblos, had been done as part of the National Park Service Chaco project that I was part of. As I said, I did some of that myself. But since that, you know, this was in the 70s and 80s. Since that, Jenny Adams has developed all sorts of new methods of analyzing groundstone. So she's got many more tools to use to apply to these types of tools. So all of these objects are housed at the University of New Mexico at something called the Hibbins Center. And so we decided we'd go back to the Hibbins Center, get out these tools from small sites and reanalyze them. So we spent a week at the Hibbins Center. Here we are down here doing our analysis, looking at the sites at the monos and metates from small sites. We got some interesting new data on wear patterns. That's one of Jenny's specialties, is looking at the surfaces of these objects and seeing how they were used. So we did learn more about that. But we also did confirm that most of these tools fit a general pattern. They were trough type. They were, you know, this is the trough here, and not all metates have a trough, but these ones did. So they were trough type. They were made of sandstone. This is the most common material in Chaco Canyon. And they were pretty roughly shaped, sort of like the ones you see here. They weren't carefully made. They were sort of roughly shaped. And in other words, at small sites, metates were sort of simple and functional. Most of the metates at small sites were fragmentary. They were not, you know, these are a couple of whole ones, but those were rare. Mostly they were broken in pieces and so on. Sometimes they've been used in architecture, you know, they were found in a wall or something like that. These were not terribly beautiful objects. And almost all, let's see, so they have a trough, and most of them had this shelf at one end. So the woman would be kneeling here and grinding in this direction, metate propped up. And they mostly had a shelf here. The shelf is gone, and this one it's been knocked off because it's fragmentary. But yeah, so that's basically what they look like. So our team also traveled to the American Museum of Natural History in New York. This is a wonderful trip that we had there, and found all sorts of incredible things in their artifact collections. So the objects at the American Museum of Natural History had been excavated by a young archaeologist named George Pepper, who was working in the 1890s. So it's an amazingly long time ago. And there we are doing analysis there. So we found that some of the Pueblo Bonito metates, especially these ones at the American Museum, were really strikingly different from the metates that have been reported from the small sites that surrounded Pueblo Bonito. Not every Bonito metate was extraordinary. Definitely not all of them were extraordinary, but we found this subset that really were. This is not all of them. This is just a sample that I'm showing you here. They were significantly different from the metates we saw at the small sites. They were unusually fine-grained sandstone, you know, really, really nice material. They were meticulously shaped and smoothed, as you can see here. And some were recovered from special ritual contexts. And this one here was just covered. It was covered with red ochre, the pigment ochre. And this doesn't do justice to the way it looked. It was, you know, it looked like blood covered this whole object. But you can see that they take the general shape of a normal everyday trough metate, but they're actually something quite different and special. Now Jenny hasn't finished her analysis or looking at the use where the marks on these things. I mean, that will tell her what they were used for. But our guess is that we won't find evidence of intensive corn grinding. I mean, that's probably not what they were doing. They might have been grinding small bits of corn for ceremonial purposes, but these were not everyday kitchen implements. That's our understanding right now. Okay, now let's get to the part of the project that you nice people supported. This is the part of the project that the Retired Faculty Association supported. We realized that the sample of objects we examined in New York was not representative of all the metates at Pueblo Bonito. What in the 1890s they'd sent to the museum the nice stuff, and they left other stuff in Chaco. We learned that there were still metates, likely from Bonito, stored out in Chaco Canyon, and we decided to make a trip out there. We went this summer. We went in August, and you guys, Retired Faculty Association, paid for my travel. Jenny Adams had gotten money for herself and Bill through the Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society, so she got their travel funds. And when we got out there, this is the very nice Park Service woman, Sam Baumkamp, who had to monitor us. She had to be with us at all times. She's just a lovely person. But anyway, we found 50 metates stored there, and we analyzed all of them, and all except for one or two were from Bonito. But the interesting thing that we realized, especially when we looked at this photo, is that most of them had been left on the plaza at Pueblo Bonito. And I can remember this from years ago, walking through Pueblo Bonito. Maybe you guys, if you went some time ago, I think before about maybe before about 2005, you would have seen these things lying around here and there in various rooms. They were displays. When we started doing this analysis, we were pulling these objects off the shelf and looking at this picture and realizing these are the same objects. I remember this one especially, and thinking that's the same one. So, you know, this photo showed that these objects had been outdoors at Pueblo Bonito, maybe for 100 years. I don't know. Maybe they took them in for a while. Maybe they weren't there the whole time. It's hard to say, but this is interesting. I mean, they are well used or well worn, weather worn objects. But the caption on this photo, which I didn't include here, the caption did give us the provenience of this object. The caption says they were found in the workrooms above Kiva Q. And Kiva Q is one of the two great kivas at Pueblo Bonito. So it certainly does the scene of ceremonies. So here is a map of a plan view of Pueblo Bonito. And here is Kiva Q. And here are these workrooms. And apparently those metates were stored in those workrooms and they fell into Kiva Q at when I guess the room sort of collapsed into Kiva Q. So, you know, the workrooms were built sometime after the Great Kiva was built. So these metates may or may not have been connected with the activities that went on in the Great Kiva. Bonito was occupied for more than 250 years. So not all the structures in the site were contemporaneous, but at least we do have a provenience for the metates that are visible in the photo. So in spite of the fact that many of these metates may have been exposed to the elements for more than a century, we learned a lot from them. They were much more variable than the ones at the museum, American Museum in New York. They were big, thick, roughly shaped metates. They were thin, tabular metates. Some were very nicely made. We didn't find any as beautiful as those back in New York, but some were quite nicely made. So I guess it isn't surprising that none of the very nice ones were left in Chaco because they were beautiful. They were taken back. I did want to highlight this one, however. This one actually wasn't from Bonito, but we did find a design on it. And this is a serpent right here and a spiral here. Jenny, Bill, and I and Steve have looked at lots of groundstone, tons of objects over the years, many objects. We've never seen a design on any of them. So I just thought I'd show you that. So that's just kind of unique.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How did these people cut stone?
Well, I mean, you can pick up big pieces of sandstone out there. So some of it was like that, but they also, I mean, you know, you'd have to use a harder stone to score it and then break it. So like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Egypt, but that's, you know, how they did it there, you know, and drop water on it, score it, break it. So, okay. Okay. So, here's where our work is headed now. We're working on the data we've collected to define unusual and likely ceremonial metates from Bonito, like this one on the left, and distinguish them from these everyday objects that were used to grind corn. We'll analyze variability in the shape, size, especially thickness, the quality of the material, the marks left by the metate, the use where, and we need to nail down the context, you know, where these things were found. Where in Pueblo Bonito did these different types of metates reside? Were they found in parts of the site that we know to have been ceremonial or important? Were they found throughout the site? We do have some information on this. There's a woman named Jill Neitzel, University of Delaware, who tried to locate all kinds of objects in Pueblo Bonito. And she found big caches of monos and metates in these rooms that are darker, especially room 42. There were just lots and lots of monos metates stored in that room. And that room is in this set of rooms in the central back part, the oldest part of Bonito, and it's the part with lots and lots of special stuff, including 2 very elaborate male burials. We might find most of these amazing monos and metates in that part of the site, but we have to do the analysis to confirm that. Now let me talk about one other thing that we're going to be looking at. You might have noticed that some of the metates that I've shown have holes in them. These are argued to be kill holes where somebody broke through the metate and made it so you can't use it anymore. They killed them. Or decommissioned them. Others would argue that these are just metates that are worn out. Jenny looked at this pretty carefully, and in some cases she could demonstrate that the hole was made from the bottom. So somebody chipped the hole out. So that's a decommissioned metate. In other cases, it's not quite that clear. So many of the Bonito metates had holes in them. Some of the small site metates also had holes in them. Were decommissioned metates preferentially found in ceremonial parts of Bonito? Where were the decommissioned metates at small sites found? This is the kind of thing that we're going to have to be looking at. And then we'll also have to confirm that the metates we're looking at really were decommissioned, that they really did have a kill hole, and it wasn't just something that was worn out. Okay, so how are we doing on time here? I was going to talk to you about stone discs, but I think we're basically out of time, so maybe I better quit.
Go on, tell us a little bit more.
Okay,
Don't stop.
just raise your hand or fall face first on the desk when you're done. Because I mean, this stuff is fascinating to me, but maybe not to everybody. Okay, so stone discs. These are objects I think are incredibly interesting. They're made of sandstone. You're seeing a bunch of them here. This is a close-up of this. These are 1896 photos. So they're about 9 centimeters in diameter, maybe 3/4 of a centimeter thick. Large numbers of them were found in room 28, and they were called jar covers by the excavator. This is Pepper's excavations. Some were very finely made, and we also observed that they probably started out something like this, very smooth, and then were probably scored and broken to get a straight edge, and then that straight edge was ground around. And I should say that my colleague Bill Gillespie got really interested in these, and so I'm using his photos and his analysis of this. But at any rate, this is eventually what you got was a stone dish that looks something like this. So we found lots of those at the American Museum, and mostly in room 28. In the same room with those objects were cylinder jars. These here you can see, this is Pepper's picture from 1896. Here's some stone discs. This is what those jars look like after they got cleaned up and taken back to the museum. So cylinder jars are aptly named. They're tall cylinders. They're decorated like other Pueblo pottery. You'll find these same decorations on other Pueblo pottery, but they're very unusual. In the whole history of Southwestern archaeology, there are only about 200 of these types of jars found. All but a few of them come from Pueblo Bonito, and most of those come from room 28. This is a very special room. So room 28 is right here in that central, important, oldest section of the site. Patricia Crown got permission from the National Park Service to re-excavate this room, and she learned a whole lot more than Pepper ever did, over 100 years before, about what happened there. So she found out that in the late 1000s, that room 28 had bordered the tops of these two kivas, Kiva Q and Kiva R, and there's a stairway, she thinks, that came right out here, right out onto the plaza, onto the West Plaza. So that was really interesting. She's also studied cylinder jars, and she found that the residue inside the cylinder jars was chocolate, cacao, chocolate. That was a remarkable discovery. Now, you may remember that chocolate is made from cacao. Cacao is a tropical plant. It had to be brought from Mesoamerica. Down in Mesoamerica, people use it in a ritual drink. Oops. So they drink it out of cylinder jars, just like the ones in Chaco Canyon. So this is a Mesoamerican cylinder jar. They froth it all up and they drink it in ritual. So that was pretty amazing when Patty Crown found chocolate in the cylinder jars in Chaco. Now, she found out a lot more too. Her careful re-excavation found out that in the late 1000s, early 1100s, on one fine day, people at Pueblo Bonito put many of their most valuable ritual jars, cylinder jars, on a wooden shelf at one end of the room, and then they set fire to the room, burned it up. The room burned, as did all the rooms around it. The shelf collapsed and the cylinder jars spilled onto the floor. So that's what Pepper excavated back in the day. Room 28 also produced some of the most beautiful, elaborate, and likely ceremonial metates that we analyzed. Many of the ones that I showed you came from room 28. So here's 3 of them that were also in that same room, also with these cylinder jars. And again, these metates are in quotes because who knows what was ground on them. It could have been chocolate, who knows. So what about the stone discs? They're not as unique as the cylinder jars. The idea was that they were put onto these cylinders, cylinder jars, but the average size of the cylinder jars is larger than the average size of the stone discs. So that means that the discs were smaller than the mouth of the jar, so they wouldn't have worked as jar stoppers. Some of them may have fit some cylinder jars, but the average diameter of these 2 kinds of artifacts, it makes you wonder. We talked when we were in New York about maybe they were coasters. Something we could consider. Coasters, jarlets, who knows? And this is a bridge too far. It's 2 minutes up. This is there's in Great Kivas ritual structures. In the place where they put the timbers that held up the roof, they put stone discs. Here are 6 of them here. They might have 3, 4, or 5 of these things. Are they a similar ritual sort of round disc-shaped objects? You might think that, or I might think that. Some people might think that. Anyway, I think I'm gonna stop there. We've done research at 3 different places. There's one more place to go. The Smithsonian has a large collection of Chacoan objects, and Bill, Jenny, and I are thinking of perhaps going there to look at those at some point. But anyway, thank you for the money that you gave us, and thank you for your attention today. I really, really appreciate it. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for such a lovely, comprehensive, and provocative talk. I think there's stuff here that all of us would like to maybe discuss a little bit more. While Kathy was talking, catering services brought in food for us all. We sort of pulled out all the stops for such a talk as yours. And we won't exactly lock the doors, but we'd like you to stay and have coffee and tea and cookies and discuss more of this with Kathy. But first, are there any questions that you'd like?
Yeah, I guess I should probably get in front of this camera again. Yeah, so let's see, I guess.
Anyone.
I went for the back one.
I wonder whether they made sauerkraut in those.
Sauerkraut, what?
Containers. You need a rock that is smaller than the opening and you wait.
Oh, and you waited it?
Fermenting.
I think I can write a paper on that. These are for making
Well, to
sauerkraut.
follow up on that, are there any nanoparticles that you can examine inside the cylinders?
Well, they did. That's where they found the cacao.
But did anything else or on the?
She also found something called black drink, which is it's a sort of caffeinated beverage that comes from the Southeast. And you said she was going back on that now, right? And that she's may not be so sure about the black drink.
Last time I heard talk about it, she said that it's consistent with yup and holly, which is
Yup and holly, yeah.
grows on the coast of Gulf Mexico, and somehow got to chocolate. She still thinks it's blackberry.
Does she? Okay, yeah. So in the back there.
I had a question. What would be the motivation for decommissioning one of those metates? It seemed like a lot of work to go through, and you could just use it in the next building or something, or just chuck it in the desert. That was my first question. Why bother doing the decommissioning if that's what it is? And the second question, is this part of a long-term occupation of humans in the Southwest? Because, you know, I
Yeah.
seem to remember vaguely some footprints were discovered in the deserts in New Mexico going back many thousands of years.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be humans. I just wondered, is these a couple of snapshots and a long-term occupation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the 20,000-year-old footprints, we haven't really digested that yet. But yeah, people have lived in the Southwest at least since 12,000 years ago. Good evidence of that, and all kinds of, and to get to your second question about why they would do that, I mean, there's all sorts of ritual things that went on with when stuff ended. Sometimes they'd burn down rooms or buildings for ritual purposes. They had trash middens that were places sometimes where they buried people because it was that important. The recycling of goods. So my guess would be it was something like that. I haven't ever read anybody that has tried to go through that. So, okay, maybe I'll go with Pesa next.
So organic residue analysis was successful for the cows.
Mhm.
Have you considered doing that with some of the metates or other downstream?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly thought about it. That would be a whole nother level of funding and that sort of thing. And, one problem is that these things have been, sitting in museums for years. That Patty Crown had problems with the cacao because, people have been sitting in museums eating chocolate and, she just as a surface, that's a problem. She finally developed a technique where she drill a little bit of the material out of the jar, out of the cylinder jar. And so she's getting an interior bit. But yeah, that would be ideal to do that.
So we are assisted by Brian Bishop, who is doing Zooming, and he is very popular. Needs to take his computer to another program.
By all
So
means.
we're going to stop. We're going to stop Zooming, but we still can continue talking.
Okay, excellent.
Say bye to the world.
Bye-bye.
So again, we have